Welcome to this month's edition of SCMYP Leadership Labs. My name is Chris Lynch, and I'm here with a couple of friends of mine that I'll introduce to you in just 1 minute. As we talk today about preparing and planning for trips and retreats in youth ministry. So I've got to my left, well, I'll do ladies first, not that, anyway.
Sounds good.
Go to my left is Ashlee Johnson. Ashlee, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am the Director of Children and Youth Ministries here at Surfside United Methodist Church.
You have no idea, but we're actually at Surfside United Methodist Church, which is why she said here. And this is David Boudolf. David, tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, my name is David Boudolf. I'm the Director of Youth Ministries at John Wesley United Methodist Church. Been down there for 11 years in Charleston, South Carolina.
In Charleston, excellent. So we went coastal this time because I like the beach, so there you go. Tell me, how long have you guys been in youth ministry as a career? How long have you been
Total about 8 years.
8 years and long time.
22 years now.
So 30 years of experience between the two of them, which is why I asked them to be a part of this conversation. One of the things that I have experienced and have heard from folks around the conference and beyond is how retreats and trips can be powerful tools in youth ministry. And so, but a lot goes into planning and preparing for and executing an effective retreat or trip. And so we're going to talk a little bit about those the nuts and bolts about retreats and trip planning. But before we do, I'm curious what your opinions are, guys, on what do you think is most valuable, or why are retreats and trips effective for youth ministry? Who wants to go first? I'll toss up in the air. Ready and go.
I'll take it.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of different reasons that trips and retreats are so valuable. First off, we see a lot of bonding with our youth members that maybe wouldn't have talked to each other before, or our new members that have just joined the youth group, getting to be able to know each other. And then on top of that, just removing themselves from their daily lives, the friends that they are with all the time, and going to a new setting, hearing a new message from somebody that they haven't heard from before, kind of sets the tone for change in our young people's lives.
Cool. Excellent. Thanks. David?
Yeah, for us, I mean the exact same thing. I'd also add in there though the kind of the mountaintop experience. The kids kind of they finally have a mountaintop experience to really talk about, to move them to a new level. It's actually a little bit dangerous, and I think we'll get into that a little bit more, that you hit so many of those mountaintop experiences and they come back,
right,
and that mountaintop experience isn't there as much, and they're always looking for that. Yeah. But the way I always look at it is, if you can get them up that mountain, hopefully they don't go as far down the next time, and they
so it becomes almost a 2 steps forward, 1 step back type thing, and the further you can go in those mountaintop experiences. And I think too, like both of you kind of touched on this, just this getting them out of the routine of life kind of has this, I don't want to say shock value, but it has this value of this is different, and so something really good is going to happen. And so I think if you go and look, and if you were to go and Google what makes retreats valuable for youth ministry and those sort of things, you could find all sorts of articles that would show and tell you from years, and this has been going on, I'm really old, and since I was doing retreats when I was in a youth group, and I think it's a tried and true thing that's it's helpful to get them out of their routines and to give them those opportunities to get close together for the week and that sort of thing. So I want to talk about, now we know that kind of that big picture of why it's important and why we value it, of kind of some of the nuts and bolts, because a lot of times if particularly in a small church or where there may be volunteer or part-time youth workers, it can be a daunting and a scary thing to think, I'm going to take 10 teenagers, which many folks think are the spawns of Satan, and I'm going to take them out of town, and I'm going to be responsible for them for 3 days or a week or whatever it is. And so a lot of folks don't do trips or retreats because they can't get their mind around what does it look like to plan something like that. So I want to kind of just walk through kind of a progression of what happens before the trip, what are some tips during the trip, and then also talk a little bit about how do you follow up after the trip. So tell me, what's some of your best pre-trip advice? What are some things that you guys know from your 30 years of experience that are important to think about when you're preparing for a trip that maybe it might not be the first thing that youth workers would think about when they're planning a trip?
I always think about the hook. I always think about what's going to get the most the most kids excited about going.
Okay.
And that's talking with my group, knowing what they're interested in, knowing where their passions lie, know the kind of things that they want to see. Are they an outdoor kind of group?
Right.
Are they a hotel kind of group? I mean, what kind of group are they? Because if I plan the camping trip for the kids that don't like the woods at all, I'm not going to get anyone to go. So you kind of just talk to the kids, and then also who you are. I don't think it does any good for me to go somewhere where I'm already decided it's not going to be a good experience.
So if you're one of those folks who likes glamping,
Yes.
the last thing you want to do is go on a trip to Hunting Island where there's no water and stay or there's no electricity. I guess there's water because you're on an island.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a bad idea.
Yeah. So it's a little bit of that, and communicating with them. And some of my most successful trips have been, the ones where a kid has thrown out some wild idea that the entire group has gotten around of, wanting to go see Graceland, and so we went to Memphis, or wanting to go to a baseball game, so we ended up going to baseball games.
They thought Graceland was something about John Wesley and Grace, and found out it was not.
Yeah, no, they knew it was.
Oh, they knew exactly.
Yeah, they knew it was.
How about you, Ashley? What was that thing that you began to think about as you're preparing for a trip?
Along the same lines, knowing what your kids are into, and then a lot of our teenagers are part of our youth council, so getting their input on what are you guys into, what kind of trips would you like to take, because it might be something I would think is really cool and they think is totally lame. So getting their input, and then knowing how many adults you need for that many kids and things like that. But like you said, really knowing your group and what interests them is key.
I want to come back to the adult thing in just a second, but I'm curious. How do you, I guess too, it would also be thinking along the lines of what is it you want to accomplish?
Yes.
Obviously you're going to have some kind of, like if we think of SCMYP's offerings, there's Sakahatchee, which is very much mission oriented, not very much, it is mission oriented. And you've got, Revolution, which is more of an introductory evangelistic type event, Immerse, which is discipleship driven. So I think that's too, as you begin to look at trips and think about trips, whether it's a retreat or even a day trip to Carowinds or Six Flags or whatever, that it's always be thinking about what it is you want to accomplish, and having those conversations as well with your folks. They understand the point and the purpose.
Yeah, and that's real important when you look at that hook and stuff, because you can real easy just start to become a cruise director, a travel agent or whatever, and just take kids wherever and not really serve the purpose of what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And knowing, sorry.
No, go ahead.
And knowing the importance of both, that the Immerse and Revolution are so impactful, and also knowing that if you take brand new kids from your youth group that don't know each other, maybe they needed a different kind of just fun opening trip at first. So we kind of try and plan our year where we have fun day trips at the beginning and the end, and then some more in-depth trips throughout the school year.
I think that's important. We always think about that idea of, ultimately as in youth ministry, our hope and our desire is to build young disciples for Jesus Christ. And so, not, as you said, I heard somebody use that terminology of, being a cruise director, and I heard somebody say, we want to create youth ministries that are battleships, not cruise ships. And so having that mentality of what are we accomplishing to make disciples as well is important. Let's talk about the volunteer thing. Tell me about how do you recruit volunteers? How do you handle the monster that sometimes is volunteers for trips?
Well, I think you said it right. The hook, we try to make it to where it's exciting and you're privileged if you get asked to volunteer. It's not something we have to guilt people in. We really talk up our trips, and then we kind of work to learn what each volunteer's gifting and passions are. So there might be a volunteer that's interested in Sunday school but would not be the right one to go on trips with us. So we kind of do that, but most of our volunteers are super excited. We choose them very carefully because volunteers can make or break your trip.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there are those situations that you get into every now and then where you just have to beg to get one because something happened, and that's always a last resort. The first part of it is really finding the ones that are gifted and what you're going to do. We've touched on a little bit about how different retreats are different things in different places, and so for me, I'm somebody that likes a lot of different things, so it's not that uncommon to go camping sometime and then stay in a nice hotel or something, nicer accommodations another time.
At least 2-star.
At least 2-star. But I also know my adults, certain ones are not going to go camping
Right.
and not going to be good ones for it. And that's kind of the basis of it. But also when you go, you know, you also have to look at the different types of retreats that you're going on. Are you going on one that's turnkey, where you're just taking them to a camp and they've planned everything for you
Right.
and everything's ready to go, and you got to take a volunteer that's going to spend time with your kids and be a camper, you know, versus the one where you're planning everything, you've booked everything, there is nobody else but you.
Right.
You've got to have your volunteer that is going to be more of the leader, the one that's
Yeah.
kind of there on Sunday nights and doing things with your youth group a little bit more, to have that ability to talk from the front.
Yeah, let's spend a couple minutes clarifying that too. David uses the term turnkey, I think, which is it's a great term, and a lot of retreats are set up to be turnkey retreats, where it's just a matter of you pay a per person fee, which we'll talk about budgeting here in a minute as well. But you pay a per person fee. You show up with your group and your leaders, but they basically take care of all the planning of the programming, the logistics, the lodging, the meals, and all that. So it really is a turnkey thing where you have a chance. And then there are some that are completely opposite. Polar end of that would be the polar opposite of that is where you've got to do all the planning, where you plan a retreat away in a city, and you've got to figure out housing, you got to figure out logistics, you got to figure out programming, and then you have kind of those middle ground things, where either you tend into a retreat center like Asbury Hills, and they take care of the lodging and the meals, and you handle the planning, or like Revolution, where we handle the planning. We handle the programming, but you still got to take care of the lodging and the meals for your group. And there's obviously value to each of those different ways. That there are obviously different levels of commitment in terms of the leader. If you're talking about a turnkey, there's a lot less time, resourcing has to happen, whereas if you're doing the full thing, there's a lot more time. So it's important to note those differences and be thinking about those differences and thinking about your time as a youth leader, as you have the time to think about the programming, or what do you find easiest. If you're one of those folks who finds that programming is the easy thing, then you want to try to find a place where they take care of the logistics, and vice versa. So let's talk a little bit about budgeting and planning for money, because it costs money to take a youth group on a trip. So what's your best advice or your best planning when you think about pre-trip and how you plan for the trip? What's your best advice you would give youth workers out there who are thinking about taking their group on a trip?
Teenagers eat a lot, so budget for food. But more than that, we fundraise a lot for our trips, and at the very beginning of our year, we kind of pick our trips that we're going to take for the whole year, whether we're doing retreats or trips or whatever. We pick them, and that way we can work our budget around those, and then all of our other youth stuff is kind of planned around that.
Yeah, and we go a little bit different philosophy at John Wesley with it. We kind of start with what is the cost of the church, and kind of look at, putting out everything that we're going to do and the cost of that, and we give that cost to the parents and say this is what it costs for the weekend.
Gotcha.
And we take our budget and fundraise and do that, but more for those that need scholarships and other opportunities, and so we have greater impact to give to those kids. Now, when we were a smaller group, and only 8 to 10 were going on it, we kind of looked at that across the board.
Sure.
to get as many people to go as possible. Now some of our retreats are pushing 60 to 80, and there's no way that you're going to, divide 10 to $20 across everybody. So
Right.
you kind of use it for those really in need.
So let's think about, and I think, what are those things to think about when you're trying to figure out that cost? Obviously, you have a turnkey deal where you're just paying them a thing. You've got basically the cost of gas and whatever transportation you've got to get there, and then once you're there and getting back. But so transportation is going to be one of those you're always going to figure into it. What are some of those other key things you need to make sure we're thinking about that maybe might go, that maybe you've learned the hard way, or maybe just somebody told you that may go forgotten if you didn't think about it in planning a trip?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest thing is to just look at, kind of a simple family trip and go, okay, we got to get there, we got to stay,
Yep.
we got to eat, and then what are we going to do? And if you kind of take those categories and write them down and figure out the budget for those and how that's going to work. The other things that get really interesting in there and the harder things to figure out is are you paying for your volunteers to go? Or are
Right.
you charging them?
Yep.
And that can really swing a budget in a huge way. If you've got to take so many volunteers and it's costing, $150
Right.
for everybody to go, it ends up adding up quickly
Sure.
on you. And then other things, is retreats are great places too to kind of brand yourself a little bit in that, and maybe throw a T-shirt in or something along those lines to kind of get the kids even more excited about it. But those costs all of a sudden
Yeah.
show up that normally aren't there, and
Yeah.
and along that kind of stuff. And then the last one is just kind of the sometimes what we call the hidden gems, or kind of the things that all of a sudden I always put a little bit of extra away, just so in case we come across something that
Like
really
we'll stop at Graceland all of a sudden.
stop at
Yeah.
Graceland all of a sudden, yeah, or just have an opportunity to really
I like
kind
your- I
of
like
do
your
something
remote.
great.
Sorry.
That's all right. You want to have that money to have that opportunity
Yeah.
to do it, and sometimes those show up and sometimes those don't. But that's
Yeah, we always plan for incidentals too, especially like we've been saying, looking at where you're going. If you're planning, actually it's just happened, we went on a whitewater rafting and ziplining trip, and no matter how many times we said bring closed-toed shoes, none of them did, and we ended up having to buy like 10 pairs of closed-toed shoes so that they could whitewater raft. So things like that you might not think about or plan into your budget, just plan for whatever might happen to happen.
Yeah, so lodging, transportation, the programming or event fees, any publicity, food, did I say food? Food, any publicity things or extras like t-shirts, those are kind of those general categories that are good to remember. You touched on something in talking about your catastrophe with open-toed shoes, about you had sent information out, and no matter how many times you've done that. So let's talk about communication a little bit. When you talk about how do you communicate, well, let's combine communication and kind of registration.
Okay.
Kind of like, because there's just this, we see it with Revolution, because like the registration for Revolution from churches, or Immerse or any of those events, is the last 2 weeks of the registration period deadline.
Flood.
Yeah, 80% of your registrations will come those last 2 weeks. So how do you handle communication to parents and to teenagers about the trips prior to, and I guess, and also, what are any secrets about registration or getting kids to register in a timely fashion or anything like that you may have?
You can't over communicate. Communicate. We announce it in all of our services. We send out emails, we send out texts, we do newsletters, we have Remind app. I mean, we try to keep it, and like you said, the hook, getting them really excited about it and letting them know it's coming up. But just communicating as much and as often as you can that it's coming, and setting a deadline really for signups for registration. They don't follow it, but
They don't.
they,
So maybe have a hard deadline and a
Yeah,
soft deadline that you don't
yeah.
announce? Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, I mean it is communicate. It's a difficult thing to figure out. We use Google Forms. We use Sign Up Genius. We use different services out there to get them to sign up. Typically, what we do is as soon as we're committed to something, we kind of put a soft registration out there to say, like, look, if you're interested, use a Google form, use a Sign Up Genius to give us your information, so we kind of get your email address to communicate with you directly about the retreat. It's pushing everyone to that point until we know they're interested in the retreat. And we've even told our parents that we'll use it and say, okay, look, we've only got 60 spots, and then the next one go to waiting list, and that causes some of that stir to say,
Right.
okay, get there.
And you can do that when you've got 60
You
or
can do
6.
that. Yes, and a lot of that actually, what drives us with it sometimes is transportation, because you can only
Yeah.
rent a 57 passenger bus
Yep.
whenever we go to do that. But back when we were small, it was a 15 passenger van that we knew we were taking, and so
Yep.
all you had was
Yeah.
15 spots. You're taking 3 or 4 adults,
Yep.
and so really all you got is 11 spots.
Yeah.
And so you kind of set that to kind of push people into getting there, and then we don't really consider someone registered until they've turned in that medical waiver and payment.
Yeah.
And then that kind of locks in the spot.
Yep. I think that's something to think about too when we talk about volunteers already, but you mentioned that, thinking about that, what's that number, and most safe sanctuary policies say, 1 adult for every 5 youth. And so as you're thinking about transportation, or as you're thinking about numbers, if you've got an average youth group size of 10, well, you're going to need to have at least 2 non-related adults based on, assuming you're like most safe sanctuary policies, and so that's going to mean you have 12 already. And so, or thinking back, if you've got transportation issues, you've got 15 spots, you're going to need to have 3 of those as adults, then that limits you to 12 with your transportation unless you figure out another way to do some transportation. So I think that's important to think about that volunteer to student ratio as well in the planning as well. Another thing we haven't really talked about, but I think it's important to bring up there. Tell me about during the trip. Talk a lot about anything you think about pre-trip at this point before we move on. Do we have it covered? Not forgotten from all your genius years? Okay, good. Not good, but okay. So let's talk about during the trip. Once you've pulled out of the church parking lot and you're on your way to wherever you're headed, from there until the time you begin to get back, what are some of those things those pointers you'd say this has been really helpful to me in my years and experience is this or that? What's just in general? What is something that you would offer up?
One thing that we kind of discovered or learned the hard way is, yes, you have to be very flexible. We were talking about that earlier. It's kind of fluid and flexible, but at the same time, you don't have to throw out a choice all of the time to all of your kids. You know, if it's an option of where to eat, just make a decision and go. Or if it's you have free time and you're trying to figure out how to fill the free time, just make your decisions and go, because you don't want 25 teenagers all giving different opinions and you having to figure it out. That was a big deal for us. Make a decision and go.
And I think some of that goes back to your planning too. Is as you're planning, is just thinking about those sort of things of where are you going to stop and eat. About if, and again, I know you gotta be flexible. My good friend Shelly Holder, if you're watching, this is your plug, Shelly, always says, "Blessed are the flexible, for they shall not be bent out of shape." And you probably heard that. And so you gotta be flexible, but having a plan too.
Right.
Says, we're gonna leave Myrtle Beach, and we're gonna leave at 10. We know we're gonna be around Columbia. At noon, time to eat lunch, so we're going to stop in that Columbia area, assuming it all goes well, and then have backup plans. So that's good. What else would you say?
I think it's just really important to know what the purpose of the trip is. To really think about what are you accomplishing this weekend, this week, that kind of stuff. It's a strong focus in on the kids and what they're going to do. And I think also that is the time where really you can set that tone with the adult volunteers real quickly of this is what this is about. It's always interesting to me that almost like the first rest stop that you get to or the first place you go to eat, you can watch and see if your adults are really interacting with your kids or if they kind of all sit at the same table and are kind of focused in on what they need to be focused in on. And there again, it depends on the trip that you're taking them on and that kind of stuff as to what's going on, what kind of volunteers you've brought.
Right.
But it's that constant focus of really trying to get these kids to connect with Christ and to really know who He is, regardless of if it's fellowship or whatever else that's going on. That's the ultimate goal.
And I think too, it's along those lines. Regardless of, yes, you're right. Know your purpose. But regardless of that, there's always this underlying purpose of it's an opportunity to build relationships. Whether that's relationships between students and students, that's relationships between you as the leader and students, that's relationships between the students and your adult volunteers. And so always looking for opportunities. And I think that's the beauty, particularly now when we rely so much on cell phones and social media to communicate and to build relationships, that it's refreshing and that's always fun to watch, like you say, when you get that first stop or once they've had a chance to let their guard down, to see these relationships begin to happen, regardless of whether it's a mission trip or a discipleship event or whatever it might be. That's pretty good to see.
Well, and that's one of the important things that I learned early doing different retreats and stuff. The fewer vehicles that I had to take, the better those relationships happen. The real easy way to cut your budget is to ask a couple of volunteers to drive their own cars and to take a couple of kids up there. But that travel time becomes so valuable, and it's hard to sit there and say, okay, look, we're gonna spend this money to rent a van or to all of a sudden we're in now 2 to 3 vans, and so let's take the big step and step up to a charter bus. If your church doesn't have those, but that is so valuable and so worth the funding.
I think that's a really good word, and I think it's a reminder too that it really is not just the programming at a retreat that makes a difference.
Right.
It's not just the teaching, it's not just the activity, it's not just the mission work, but there really is, I would say, as much value, if not more, into those conversations that happen about whether it's a part of the program, small group discussion, or whether it's just And I've been there where you've been laying in a room in a cabinet in the middle of the night, or almost the middle of the night, when you're almost asleep and everybody's almost asleep, and that one kid goes, "I got a question." And if your first thought is, "Oh my God, you got to be kidding me!" But then those are the times when I can remember back, and those being the most rich ministry moments. And so when you've got that outlook of, it's not just a program, it's every moment of that time, really from even part of the prep time until you're back, that's when ministry really happens. Any other thoughts about
I think
the trip?
reminding the kids that too, and setting that expectation for your kids that this isn't just a fun free-for-all. Yes, we're going to have fun, but this is time where we grow in relationship together and with Christ, and letting them know that and having that expectation for them makes a big difference as well. So not just us adults, but for them.
Yeah, that process is part of the growth, not just the whole thing. Let's talk just a minute as we kind of wrap up our time together about follow-up, because I think, we mentioned earlier the mountaintop experience. I think that's obvious, but there's, and it's almost funny, and to me, now when you go to on these retreats, and when you have speakers, and that last session is always, well, now you're going down from the mountaintop, don't let the flame die, or something along those lines. And I think there's, and I'm not making fun of anybody, but it's just that natural progression of, when you get away from your norm, you have a time to spend a few days or a week either serving or really hearing great teaching and talking about your faith, that becomes such a high in your faith journey. What advice or pointers do you have for folks in terms of once you're back and follow up to kind of capitalize? So as you said earlier, that mountaintop doesn't go all the way back to where it was or even lower. How do you keep some of that momentum? How do you boom that momentum? Or how do you help that become a lasting growth experience versus just a flash in the pan?
I think that the follow-up is one of the most crucial parts from these trips and retreats, because reminding the kids that you stepped away for a weekend or a week or whatever, and you had this amazing experience, and then coming back and teaching them, like, that wasn't anything super crazy. These are real people in your life every day. Everybody likes to think that it was so different, that was amazing, and I can't have that same experience. And like, no, you can. These are people in your youth group, and these are adults that love you and are in your life, and you can still stay off your phone for a little bit and talk to the people that are here. You can still get into the Word and have deep discussion, and it doesn't mean that life is always going to be easy, like you said. But maybe the lows aren't as low, because now you realize you have your people, your team coming alongside you, encouraging you and stuff like that. So I think the meeting together as soon as you can when you get back from a retreat and kind of discussing all of the emotions and the lessons and all of that, and now how can we continue to carry it on is very important.
That's good.
Yeah, I think I think it's also giving the kids an opportunity to communicate with the congregation of what they really got out of the trip. I talked a little bit earlier about doing the trip to Memphis and the kid that wanted to see Graceland. I don't know that I brought up that one of our youth wanted to see it, but it was the big thing that he wanted to do. And when we came back, we went to communicate to the congregation what a great trip it was. And part of that trip, we also did some mission work.
Okay.
But I asked the youth to share, the fun part of the trip. And he got up there and shared Graceland and that kind of stuff. But between the two services, he came to me and said, you asked me to share the fun part, but really can I talk about the mission part?
Wow.
And it was his desire to go and see Graceland that got us on that trip. Yeah. But it was his heart for mission work that really made that a mountaintop experience for him. And, I think that's a big part of it, is letting the kids share those mountaintops and where that connection is made with Christ and those new relationships and that kind of stuff. And then the next part is, be intentional about telling your volunteers, they don't need to follow up by maybe always volunteering at youth and being there, but when they're in the hallways at church, look for those kids that they were on that retreat with and have those inside jokes and say the silly things to each other that make a great difference. And then, for the full-time youth worker that's seeing those kids, the other kid that you really got to be intentional about reaching out to is the kid that just came on the retreat. Mm-hmm. Whether that's a new kid or a brand new kid, they might not step foot in your youth room for a while again, but when that next trip comes around, you need to make sure that you're intentional about inviting them back to hit that relationship again, or when you see them out, and at a local store, at a restaurant or something like that, to have those conversations then.
Yeah. I think too, it gives you a chance to be creative. You know, communication too early is a chance to be creative as you communicate with students and your congregation.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't just have to be, you know, having a kid stand up on a Sunday morning and share their experience. It could be as simple as, you know, putting together a simple highlight video or some pictures on a board outside the sanctuary. You know, it doesn't have to be, you know, anything elaborate. It could be something, you know, behind the scenes. But be creative about how do you communicate. But I always say too is, you know, encouraging young people to share some about the experience, about what happened, but more importantly, how did it change you?
Yeah.
That's the key, I think, is helping your congregation understand, because I think then the congregation is more excited about what's happening in the youth ministry. They're willing to support those sort of things going on. It's not just, well, you know, we've got this budget, these kids go have a good time. Yeah, you're having a good time, but you're also having life change, life transformation. That's what's important. So, well, listen, thank you guys for your time. That wraps up this edition of the SCMYP Leadership Labs. If you have questions about taking your youth on a trip, you're thinking about going to Immerse or Revolution, which, by the way, you can still sign up today for, you can send us an email at info at scmyp.org. We'll be glad to get back with you and answer those questions. Or if you have suggestions for future topics you'd like us to discuss here at SCMYP Leadership Labs, you can also send an email there to info at scmyp.org. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.